Right, you've probably seen already Calvin Kattar versus Aljamain Sterling prelim for UFC 300, and I am actually shocked, and I don't like to use this word a lot, but I am actually shocked that 74% of people on Topology are already picking, there's only 250 votes, but still are picking Aljamain Sterling to beat Calvin Kattar. Calvin Kattar, in my opinion, is going to send Aljamain Sterling to the Shadow Realm. Yes, I know Aljamain Sterling is a champion in the bantamweight division. Was, not anymore. And I've noticed from Aljamain Sterling, he struggles against boxers. And the fight that I would have rather have seen from him, which they can't make now, is a fight with him and Brian Ortega. Because if he fought Brian Ortega, he's got a higher chance of moving up towards getting a title fight compared to fighting a guy like Kattar. But now, after hearing that, you might think I'm backtracking. Because I'm going to say to you, it's foolish picking Kattar, but I think Kattar is a much harder fight than Brian Ortega. And if I was Aljamain Sterling, which I'm not obviously, I would have started off by fighting a guy who's very low ranked. But you just said to pick Brian Ortega. I'm saying if he wants to go in a faster route, I will say. But I would have picked for him to fight a guy like... It's going to sound stupid. It really is. A Danny Gay, maybe even an Alex Caceres to welcome into the featherweight division, because you've got to remember, yes, he's big and he's a massive bantamweight, but when you move up a division, the power discrepancies are going to be much bigger. And like I said a minute ago, he has struggled with boxers. Calvin Kattar is as boxing focused as you can get. Faking out the jab constantly like he did against Josh Emmett, should have won that fight. And Calvin Kattar, when have you ever seen him get like manhandled and ragdolled on the ground? You never see it. And you'll say, look at him, he's fighting a bunch of strikers. But when he fought against a guy like Zabit was only able to get one takedown, I believe, on him. And when he got that one takedown, he wasn't able to hold it for more than like 30 seconds. Let me just check to make sure that's true. Yeah, he could not hold him on the ground. You don't really see him get held on the ground because he can grapple. And if a guy like Zabit, who looked extremely good at featherweight at the time, is not doing... I can't see Aljamain Sterling doing the body triangle and galore thing he likes to do. By getting the takedown and getting the body triangle and trying to look at the rear naked choke. I don't see it happening. And I think you're coming up against Calvin Kattar. If you do what you usually like to do by pressuring forward with the kicks like he always likes to do, and you try and get in their face early, you are going to get sent to the Shadow Realm the exact same way Sean O'Malley did it, by a counter strike. Because if he's faking, not fainting, you know what that is, explosive movement compared to a fake, more telegraphed, you can see it coming, but it's not intentionally trying to hit you with it. If that's being in his face, it's kind of going to block his vision, but then you might say that's going to open takedown attempts. But because Calvin Kattar, in my opinion, has got very good takedown defense, I don't think Aljamain Sterling's going to be able to get that going. So what I see happening is Aljamain Sterling looking to come rushing in, and in the first round, I don't think he's going to knock him out, but he's going to feel the featherweight power of Calvin Kattar. And Calvin Kattar hasn't knocked out someone in a long time. The last time he actually finished someone was Jeremy Stephens. And that was back in 2020. So by the time the fight happens, it would have been like almost 4 years since he got a KO. And Aljamain Sterling, his striking is very mid. Yeah, he outstrikes a Hudo coming off a long layoff. But if you watch how he strikes, it's just kicking. There's no boxing with it. And if you just try and kickbox against Calvin Kattar, because he'll pressure against you, and even though he's kind of like heavy on the front leg, he's so unorthodox. 1 minute he'll be heavy on the front leg, and then the next minute he'll be like loosely using lateral movement. It's kind of like a weird boxing variation to use in MMA. But Aljamain Sterling, what else he should have done is kind of like grow into the weight class. Like, I know it sounds ridiculous because he weighs enough to fight here and he was a big bantamweight, but he should have took more time to like kind of bulk up a bit more, prepare even more. He might even be doing this now, and then go into a fight, but not with Calvin Kattar. Like, he's ranked, and I'm just telling you, when he feels a punch off a featherweight, it's going to feel completely different because he's fighting bantamweights. Yeah, there are some hard-hitting bantamweight fighters like Piotr Jan, but remember, featherweights are going to hit more. The more weight you have on you, the more potential power you can generate. And Calvin Kattar's not one of these guys who can't box. He's a boxer. And that's why I think it's going to be a hard problem for him, because look at the Sean O'Malley fight. Was able to stop the takedowns Aljamain was having to like rush in because he couldn't close the distance because of the footwork, and then he gets chinned. So I don't know, actually, thinking of how Aljamain might approach this. Yeah, we see him pressure, but will he be more like cautious on the back foot, knowing that if you rush in against Calvin Kattar, he will be ready to counter you with his jab as you rush in, or follow off with like that right straight. And remember, he's got some very good elbows, and if he can get them elbows working, it's going to hurt Aljamain badly and cut him up. Because one thing you might say, he does compete in these competitions. Like, he beat Mike Grundy in a grappling competition, who is a very good grappler, and he did it at 165 pounds, which is actually bigger than featherweight weight class. But we all know fighters don't actually fight at their actual weight class. But even though he beat Mike Grundy, you've got to remember MMA grappling and freestyle grappling and folk wrestling, all of that's completely different because there's no punches when you're doing that type of wrestling. So yeah, he's looking good in these competitions. That is where punches aren't being thrown whilst you're trying to do these grappling like type of transitions. And that's why I think I don't want to use that as a base, because like I've mentioned, and I'm going to mention it for the third time, the power difference between featherweight and bantamweight is going to be huge for a guy like Aljamain Sterling, because he will get hit at one point because of his fighting style. You are not going to just ragdoll Calvin Kattar and just get him in a body triangle. Yes, he could take his back at one point, but in my opinion, I think Calvin Kattar's grappling, like I've mentioned before, is good enough to defend against it. Like, he's did well against Shane Burgos, stopping takedowns, did well against Zabit. He's done well against, what was his name? Josh Emmett, stopping the takedowns. Even though he's a defensive grappler, he can still grapple, but he barely uses it. A bit like Robert Whittaker. So, Aljamain Sterling, you might laugh at this and say, how are you going to call it foolish when he was the bantamweight champion? Key word, bantamweight. And I don't know why Aljamain Sterling gets all the hate. Okay, he looked like a fish out of water after Petr Yan kneed him in the head. But that's Petr Yan's fault. It's not ONE FC. You can't just knee someone in the head and just expect, yeah, that's fine. It should be the rules, but it's not the rules. So I don't like that thing where people say, oh, he was diving around. It is brutal getting hit with a knee when you're not expecting it on the ground. And really, more anger should be directed at Yan for, you know the rules. You're meant to have a high fight IQ. Like, even Magomed Ankalaev, they're meant to have good fight IQs, which they do. But when it came to using common sense, it wasn't there. Like, you know you can't knee them on the ground. Why are you doing it? And he did it. And I know I went a bit off topic and I said I'm going to do that more often. But Aljamain Sterling, in my opinion, he is going to get TKO'd badly. Whether it was in the first round or the third round, I think he's going to absorb a lot of damage. Yes, Calvin Kattar's coming off an injury, but I think this fight will be like the Bryce Mitchell against Josh Emmett. Josh Emmett, I believe, was an underdog going into that fight. And I believe Calvin Kattar's going to be quite a big underdog going into this fight. And they both offer similar things, but Josh Emmett obviously carries more power. And I think the difference between Aljamain and Bryce Mitchell is Aljamain's more aggressive with his grappling approach compared to Bryce Mitchell, who's more patient and he'll like to stay on the feet, maybe go on the back foot and take his time before shooting in. And that's the difference between the two. And I know you're going to think, why have he brought up Bryce Mitchell? I'm bringing him up to show you how Aljamain is very aggressive, and being aggressive against a very strong boxer can lead to you getting knocked out, like it did against Sean O'Malley. And I'm sorry for the people who disagree. You can come back to this when the fight happens. I'm very confident Calvin Kattar is going to TKO Aljamain Sterling badly. So yeah, that's all I've got to say. Thank you for watching. Talk to you soon.